Okay, so welcome to Enigmatic Consciousness. I'm back with Miss Shayleen again of the Light Journey. Welcome, Shayleen.
Thanks for having me back, Steve. Super excited to be talking about this topic today.
Yes, and what will we be talking about?
We are going to be talking about helping others to help themselves.
Yay.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on this. So where would you want to start with that?
Yeah, well, firstly, I love that we decided on this topic because as we met last week for the first time in person, when we were kind of brainstorming of some topics for the podcast, and I just thought, even from our first conversation, I was like, there's just this intuition around you that I can kind of sense, and whether we're like on the same wavelength or not. I just thought it was, coincidence that it was literally like a week before we sat down and met that I was kind of asking myself this question. And then, sitting across the table from you, and then you say these words like back to me of something that I was thinking about. And it just clicks, right? Sometimes you
Yeah,
just like, even more than you can understand it on like a logical or a cognitive level, you just like feel it, and you feel that truth. So it seemed right that we would be having this conversation. And I guess for me, like I can see this a lot in my practice with Reiki. Um, I think sometimes in our lives and in our routines, in the experiences that we go through, sometimes we like wish almost for like a magic wand, a quick fix, like a solution to all of our problems, or even, somebody, and I'm sure that you see this in your position, in the small shop that you work in, people that are almost like addicted to coming to other people for the solutions to their problems, like
yeah,
addicted to getting the tarot, always coming in for a new crystal, or even for a Reiki practice, like every 2 weeks. It's like religious, it's like clockwork. And those people are kind of coming to you to fill their cup instead of filling their own. So I think it's so important that people learn, and not even learn, but come to have that understanding and that awareness that they themselves are capable and have the power to really nurture themselves on all those levels, mind, body, and spirit, to start taking care of themselves, start taking responsibility for the areas in their lives that are maybe going wrong or just not bringing them happiness or satisfaction.
yeah. Um, it's funny because I was talking to a friend yesterday about this, and we got on the topic of crystals, and she had said, it's not necessarily the crystals, like you still need to do the inner work. And it's really like it's an energy tool, but I think for a lot of people, it's one of those things where like you pick up a crystal and you're vibing with it and you read the meaning to it and it resonates with something that you're struggling with to deal with yourself. And it kind of just gives you that comfort and reinforcement that you can deal with it because you have this tool. And even if it's almost like you've manipulated yourself into believing that the crystal's doing it for you, you're really doing it yourself. Um, and I think that happens with a lot of people, like where I work, is that they feel really stuck on something and they see a crystal and they read the meaning to it and it really resonates with them, and then they take that and they actually like take the initiative to work on it now because they believe that they have this tool that's going to help them do it. So I mean, in all reality, I can't really confirm or deny how helpful crystals are with like emotional issues, but if you believe it's helping you, then it's no different than say you got the flu every year for 5 years straight, and then you got a flu shot one year, and you really genuinely believed so strongly that you weren't going to get the flu that you didn't get it. You can say the flu shot did it, or it could just be because you didn't get it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
or you believed it so strongly that you didn't. Um,
Well, we
yeah,
both we both know that the power of your thoughts has influence to create, your reality or your perception. So it does, the power of your
Yeah.
thoughts, right? What you're thinking about, you're going to attract. And I absolutely agree that, you know, something like crystals or the different divination tools, they can be affirming for people in terms of some of those experiences that they're going through.
Yeah. And even with tarot, like for people who, they really get their fix on those readings and hearing what they need to hear, I think a lot of it comes from that they come into it where they're kind of on the edge of whether they're actually going to put the effort into something or not. And then they get told, yeah, if you do this and you go this way, you'll have success with it. So then they go into it believing that they're going to be successful. Um, and whether they're successful or not, I mean, kind of becomes irrelevant down the road because um, as long as they believe they are, then to some degree they will be, whether it's exactly what they believed it would be. It kind of depends what your definition of success is. But I don't know. People are just like, if the media has shown us anything, it's how easy it is to manipulate our minds. Um, and you can manipulate your own mind with whatever you need to, whether it's tarot or Reiki or crystals or whatever. And I mean, there's the flip side to that too. I see a lot, especially with Reiki, where people go for a treatment and they feel better initially, but they don't apply anything after that. And then they don't understand why they start feeling like crap again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's, well, I just need to go for another treatment, and things will be good again for a while. And it's just becomes this avoidance of the problem. And I'm sure, like, you've been doing this for a few years now. You probably have had people where it's like they just keep coming back to you, and it's kind of the same issues over and over again, right?
Yeah, part of what I think, and like what I'm hearing too, even in just some of the things that we're saying, is a lot of people look outside of themselves for the solution to their problems. So looking, and not even like external validation, but like literally looking, to experts, to friends, to family members. Like we read books, we look for the tools and the resources. And it's not very often that people will stop and slow down and turn inwards. And that's been a lot of my experience in my journey. And even as you said, like, absolutely, there's been clients that I've worked with and continue to work with that they kind of just are looking for a band-aid solution. And so much of the Reiki philosophy is, there is that part where we do need to take responsibility for our actions and as well our well-being. Like, what are you going to do about the problems on your plate? Like, we all face challenges, we all face discomfort, we all have things that happen to us that impact, our well-being and how we go about our actions in the world. So I think when we can start to bring the energy back in, bring the awareness back in, that's when to me, that's where the magic happens. That's when we really can start to challenge some of those limiting beliefs, those limiting behaviors, identify maybe cycles that you've been going through for so long unconsciously that they just become part of your day to day, and you don't really realize that something's wrong until you find yourself in that stress, that overwhelm, or experiencing that discomfort, and you just know that something needs to change.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to a lot of that. I went through a lot of that myself. And I don't know, it's just interesting. And I don't know if maybe this is just my way of seeing it or not, but like I feel like we're almost taught and conditioned to be like ourselves is the thing that we need to fear the most. Like it's always, you can't deal with anything yourself. You need to go outside of yourself to be able to cope with it or deal with it. And um,
Well, there's that disconnect, and it's almost like
yeah,
exactly what you're saying, that somebody else knows better than you. Like,
yeah,
somebody else knows you more and knows you better than yourself, so you should exactly, talk to the experts, talk to the doctors, listen to all these people and these professionals and do what they're doing instead of aligning with your own truth and starting there.
Or that good old take these pills and just numb yourself and ignore it.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, I've heard that. That was a lot of my healing journey. Exactly. Even, going into the doctor's office and you're like, okay, I'm not taking the prescription this time, but
Yeah.
every time leaving with the freaking prescription. So,
Well, yeah, and I mean, I did take a wellness program a few years ago. I don't know if I mentioned that last time we talked, but and it was great. I got a lot of tools, and then at the end of it, they're like, "Well, you really should take this medication and, keep doing what we taught you, but you really should take the medication." And I
yeah,
said, "I really believe I can do this on my own without it." And they're like, "Well, what if you can't?" I said, "Well, I've developed a 2-year cycle, so if I'm back here again in 2 years, I'll try the medication."
yeah,
Said if I don't come back in 2 years, I don't need it. So,
yeah,
and I didn't end up back there in 2 years. So I'm glad I didn't.
yeah.
I
Good,
just
good for you.
trusted my intuition on that one because I was really, um, I had tried it and they're just like, well, if it's not working, you need to take a higher dose. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, how is tripling the dose of something that's not working going to be a solution? Like that just seems a little backwards to me.
Yeah, and it can be scary as well. Like when I had my experience, like being diagnosed with depression and PTSD at 15 years old, and going through, these doctor's appointments, and exactly like, okay, here's the diagnosis. Now here's the solution: is these pills, is this medication? And don't get me wrong, I totally do believe that the medical system has its place, but again, having a understanding of yourself and knowing how you want to approach your self-care, your mental health, it can be a little scary trying to navigate in that, and especially when we do put so much trust in doctors. Like, you're like, it's a doctor, they should know, but then exactly, they give you these pills and you're wired, or you're numbed out, or you can't connect with yourself on that deeper level.
Yeah. But at the same time, too, if you went to a doctor's office and they said to you, you can do this on your own, you don't need me. Um, they they would
The next time
they
you go back, it would just be a vacant space.
well, yeah,
The
like they
doctor's
they
office.
wouldn't they wouldn't they wouldn't be making any money off of
Yeah.
this. So like, and I get it. Like it is a tool, but it is a business too, and
Yes.
it's that balance of and this isn't even relating to mental health. This was entirely actually because of an ear infection. I went to a walk-in clinic and the doctor gave me a prescription for it and it didn't clear up. And I went back 2 weeks later because it hadn't gotten any better. And I saw a different doctor and the different doctor said to me, I don't know why he gave you this antibiotic. It's absolutely useless.
Yeah.
But it was one of those ones that comes in like the fancy packaging that clearly like he was getting a kickback from writing it off to everybody who was walking in the door. And it's like
Yes.
to come back and have the other doctor just be like, I don't know why he did that because it's useless. And I'm like, well, how can I trust that you have my best interest in mind? Because that could have got a lot worse. Like I could have got a lot more sick if that infection had spread into my bloodstream or something. So like, what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so you got to feel it out.
Advocating for your health as well too is the big thing, I think, because I've seen that as also working with clients is, a lot of people will just take that first diagnosis right at face value. They don't question it. They don't get a second opinion. Some people don't even, research the diagnosis or research the medication they've been given. It's just, well, the doctor said, and all be all. So I think
Yes.
advocating for your own health and well-being in a way that aligns with your goals and your values, it's really important.
Yeah. And especially with depression, because I find it's just such a simple solution to write someone a prescription and give them a diagnosis for depression.
Yeah.
And like I understand where medication plays a part where if people have like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, depression is a totally different thing from that. So it shouldn't be treated like a quote unquote mental illness. Like it's almost grouped in with those things where you go in and they give you that and then they basically tell you like, oh, you need this medication. You're not going to be able to function with this depression looming over you unless you take this. And
Yeah.
like in my eyes, we need to kind of revamp the system in a sense where the medication is like a last resort when it comes to
Yeah.
depression, and there needs to be like a whole bunch of programs and tools set up
Yeah.
before they go, we need to give you this medication, like you're just not, like your brain just doesn't function properly, kind of thing. Like, because the
Hmm.
medication's for a chemical imbalance, it has nothing to do with whether or not you're depressed. But if you're depressed, eventually it's going to throw off chemicals in your brain.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, I just feel like they do it kind of backwards in that sense, but I get it because again, it's a business, and they they run it like a business in that sense. They need to sell you something when you go in.
Yeah, based on profit as opposed to, excuse me, the actual health and well-being of, the client. And I think the medical field is kind of like set up in two ways in that regard. So we don't treat the root cause of the problem. We're just, yeah, to me it's almost like the band-aid solution, where it's like, exactly, here's some medication for this issue or this ailment, without ever looking at the cause or how the issue came to be. So that I think is part of the problem, right? If there was a more holistic approach of looking at the mind, the body, the emotion, the spirit, right, and then kind of deciding something that's going to fully encompass like all of those aspects and treat you as the unique individual that you are. And then the medication itself, like I'm taking a herbology course right now, and one of the most interesting things about learning the difference between pharmaceuticals and plant medicines is that when you're given a medication, most medications are derived from plant medicines, but what they've done is isolated that one healing component, the one medicinal factor in the plant, and they strip away everything else. So it's like comes in the most concentrated form, and then they have to add in all of this other filler stuff because it would be toxic to our body to have that pure concentrated medicine. So they have to add in a bunch of crap so your body can process it, but it actually requires more energy in your body to even digest it and make the medicine work. So it's like creating all of these extra steps. It's taking away extra energy in the body already. So it just seems kind of backwards to me personally that, we do this to ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. And it's like, I don't know, and with a lot of those medications too, like you need to take it continuously before it starts working. So it's like a lot of the antidepressants and that, it's you get a, you need to take this 2 3 times a day, and
Yeah.
it might be 6 to 8 weeks before you see any change. Um, which is, I kind of think of it in that sense that like you're just building up the toxin in your body, but like to a point that it's not lethal, but you need to keep building it up before it's effective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess to kind of shift this though, what are maybe some tools? Like if someone kind of came into you and said, I'm at a point that I want to change my life and I don't want to continue doing what I'm doing, and I
Mm-hmm.
recognize this cycle that I keep going through, what's kind of some direction that you would give them to kind of start off?
Yeah, for sure. And something too that I just even wanted to kind of touch on and add to that is a lot of times people will come looking for that solution to their problems without identifying like the problem or the issue didn't just pop up overnight. It's been days, weeks, months, years in the making. And
Yeah,
it's usually only when it becomes, yeah, a discomfort, an issue, you're kind of in that place of like stress and chaos and overwhelm that you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like something needs to change. So I do see sometimes where people will come and they just literally expect like one Reiki session is going to fix them, that everything's going to be fine. So I think it's like there has to be that awareness that your problems didn't just pop up overnight. That it's, like I said, it's been in the making, depending on how long you've been experiencing the issue. But the first step is, as you said, it's the awareness. So identifying that, there is something going on that's creating discomfort, creating illness, creating dis-ease, disharmony, whatever it is. So once you can figure that out, then exactly, you can kind of create the space for taking some steps or learning some new ways of being that will help to combat, that stress, or whatever it is, those challenges that you're facing. I have a little notebook here beside me because, as I mentioned to you when we met to discuss like this topic of conversation, I had recently sat down and did some journaling because somebody very close to me was going through a really challenging time. And it was hard for me at first because this person is like fully aware of, I'm a Reiki practitioner. Like, I feel like my whole purpose here on this earth is to like help others and help guide them to more holistic living, more mindfulness, more peace in their lives. And it was like everything I was saying to this person, it was like just not getting through. It was not resonating with them in a way that just clicked, right? So it really forced me as a practitioner to question, how can we teach self-care to people, to different people, because the way I learn is going to be different than how you learn, Steve, and from the next person and the next person. So I had wrote down like, how do you teach somebody how to start loving themselves? How do you teach somebody how to implement more self-care? um, so I had just written like, the awareness is key, because if you don't know what's going on, if you're walking around in the dark, then everything just kind of looks the same, feels the same. um, so I'd say connecting with yourself, and whether it's through meditation or breath work or affirmations, starting to establish like a relationship with yourself is very important. Connecting with your intuition. So intuition is like a muscle. I always tell my clients, everybody has it. For some people, it's really strong and really developed in there, and they know they can just connect in with their intuition. For some people, it takes a little bit more work and a little bit more effort. So even to sit at the start of your day with your hands at your heart center and even just ask yourself, like, how am I feeling? What do I need to honor myself? What is my mind, body, spirit trying to tell me or trying to bring into my awareness, so that you can start to make those changes for yourself. Your emotions are also a really big indication of what's going on for you. A lot of times I think people are kind of quick to want to dismiss their emotions because of the discomfort that can come up with some of them. For some reason, there seems to be this belief that we're all just supposed to be like happy all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that can be confusing for people too, especially when you do, for those people who are on a spiritual journey, or even, for myself and in my experience, something with like social media, and people are like, well, you don't want to be posting, like the wrong stuff or like any of your struggles or challenges, but that's a very real part of our experience of our day to day. There's always going to be external influences or things that come up that are going to be unsettling. So I think making sure that you have the tools to navigate through those difficult times is another way that you can help yourself when
Yeah.
challenges do pop up, right? Then the behavioral component. So exactly, you could have all the information in the world. I always say this to my clients as well too, and I know it's kind of an extreme example, but like, if you literally had the cure for cancer for somebody and you put it down on the table in front of them, there's going to be a percentage of people who they wouldn't pick it up and put it in their
No.
arm. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And there's a number of different reasons why that would happen. But some people, they build an identity around crisis or their trauma or their diagnosis. So thinking that there's anything beyond that can be quite scary or triggering for people, because that's all they have ever known. So to think that there's something outside of that, to stepping out of the darkness and into the light, um, it can be scary for some people. So
And especially I find with cancer, because there's been, and we've actually seen this happen where people get misdiagnosed with cancer, um, but they believe for a couple years that they have it, and then once they get the proper diagnosis, they're suing the hospital they got diagnosed at. And a lot of that comes from that they don't want their life to go back to the way it was, because they were this cancer patient, they were this victim of this disease, and they were coddled by everybody around them, and then suddenly that's taken away. So yeah, it's true. Like if the cure for cancer was something, especially if it was something stupidly simple, and someone who had struggled with cancer for several years, you put that down in front of them, just said, well, if you do this today, all your problems are going to be gone. A lot of people wouldn't take it, because it's like, well, I don't want to go back to who I was before I had cancer. I
Mm-hmm.
like this cancer version of me. People love this version of me, because I could die at any minute, so everybody just is like, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, definitely, it shapes your identity, and a lot of people, again, they wouldn't take the cure because they're happier and more fulfilled being sick.
Mm-hmm.
And you can relate that to a lot of mental things too. A lot of people wouldn't want to cure depression if they're being coddled all the time because of their depression, because once you take that away, they just you go back to being one of those, quote unquote normal people who doesn't have this disease, as it's
Mm-hmm.
often put. And it's hard to deal with when that's all your external validations coming from using that as a part of your identity, a part of wearing it like a badge.
Yeah.
um
And I think just coming back to that, like there's a lot of fear in healing for
oh
some
yeah.
people, but there's also like you can't force healing on anybody, right? So coming back to that extreme example, even it doesn't matter what you're suffering from. If there was a cure, maybe I judge of you, Steve, and I'm like, yeah, you seem kind of sad, you seem kind of anxious, and I really want to give you Reiki and send you Reiki. Until I have your consent, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah,
So
no.
coming back to that idea, there has to be a willingness in the participant, in the individual, to go through those motions, to start taking the steps and the action to see the results that they want to see.
Yeah, and the
What are you
flips
going to do about it?
the flip side of that too is, um you see a lot of people who get on the path of deciding to be a healer, and they feel like it's their God-given right to heal everybody, everyone that they come across with a problem, they're going to fix it. And there's that flip side to it of, we can't fix anybody unless they want to fix themselves. We can't
Yeah.
heal anybody unless they want to heal themselves.
Yeah.
um like,
No,
if I
exactly. Like, as I mentioned, that's so much of a part of the philosophy and foundation to the Usui Reiki is, the Usui, who developed this practice, that was something that he experienced early on after receiving, his enlightenment and understanding how to use the Sanskrit symbols and mantras, was he wanted to give that Reiki healing to everybody. And he did for a time, but then he observed that people will result and kind of reform back to their habits, their lifestyles, their addictions, all of those things, until they come to a place within themselves where they're ready to take that responsibility and say, oh, it's actually A, B, and C that's causing this symptom, or I constantly am putting myself down, so no wonder I don't have any self-esteem. Like,
yeah,
you have to identify that peace within yourself before things will shift.
and that's it. Like, if if someone said to me, what's the cure for depression, I would say the cure for depression is reaching a point where you don't want to be depressed anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
Like,
Yeah, like amen. Exactly.
wake up one day and say, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I'm tired of feeling like this.
Yeah.
And it's reaching that point where you can really look at yourself and say to yourself, why do I keep doing this to myself?
Or what can I do differently?
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
part of it. That's the next step after that. Once you have that awareness of it, is what do I need to start doing? But it's like, for me, a big thing was realizing how much of it was just me doing it to myself, and I spending years and years treating it like it was something outside of myself
Yeah.
that was causing me harm, and it was entirely self-inflicted. Um,
something or someone that is doing these things to you.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I had an endless list of people, places, and things to blame for it. It's
Yeah, I think
all
that
fun.
like it comes back to that component even of like what you think about you attract. So that's the next thing I have written down after like the behavioral point is like your mind. Like what do you think about it? What do you think about yourself? What do you think about the world that you live in? What do you think about your job? Because if you're telling yourself this internal dialogue of like misery and unhappiness and victimization, you're going to find those things all around you.
Mhm.
And then it just becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy almost, where you're just kind of negatively reinforcing those negative beliefs, and then you kind of get stuck in this little cycle or pattern, and exactly you're like there's no way out, and you kind of feel like you're just drowning and overwhelmed all the time.
Yeah, and I find too with a lot of depressed people, because like attracts like, so they attract more depressed people into their lives. But it creates this like reinforcement of these like-minded people who have victimized themselves to everything all around them. And that makes it hard too, because you might be the one in the group who reaches that point where you say, I want to make changes in your life. And then aside from attaching it to your identity, it's also attached you to this group of people. And you're going, well, shit, if I do something about my depression, I'm not going to have any friends anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's hard when the longer you let it go, the more things add on to it, because your relationships with other people are built on who you were in that depressed state. And um you would associate it as an identity, so it's going through that whole crisis when it's at that tipping point. And I went through that myself, where I was absolutely terrified at one point in the spiritual journey of just, if I take this step and I keep moving forward, am I going to lose who I am? And it's just realizing that you're still going to be you. You just might be a bit of a different version of yourself, or as it was put to me from myself, a better version of myself,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I can agree with a lot. Um,
But
Another
like
thing,
transform that transformation is possible, exactly, right?
oh,
or
it
like or
totally is.
alchemy, right? Taking your negative experience, taking that darkness, and being able to see something in there that is positive or
Yeah,
beautiful, and focusing more on that instead of, like you said, creating this whole identity or story of yourself where that you won't be who you are without those things.
yeah. And I think part of it is almost taking that time to see the future versions of yourself, like really take a step back from yourself and look at it as, if I stay on this path, who am I going to be in 20 years? But who could I potentially be if I take this path?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of seeing the difference, and just, wanting to be one version or the other, and, having that as like a goal point to strive for, versus staying wrapped up in who you are and not really giving it any attention or awareness beyond, um, I don't know how to put this without sounding like an asshole, but self-absorbed behavior, I guess, because it really, a lot of it is like, we're all, as human beings, like we're all on some level self-absorbed. Um, every single one of us is, and a lot of it is kind of being aware of that, because people take everything personally. Like it becomes this like guilt and shame thing, where it's like, well, if you say I'm self-absorbed, it's like I have to feel guilty about my behavior. It's like, no, it's just being aware of how you act and how you treat other people, and kind of assessing, like, am I going too far in the own direction of myself as to what I'm giving back to other people, um, or am I just you know choosing not to be aware of things. Because, and I can admit that too, like, my biggest problem is that my head was way too far up my ass, and I never wanted to admit that I was the problem. And then I just kind of reached that point where I had to pull it out and kind of slap myself around a bit and say, hey, you're the problem. You know,
Yeah. There's a
I don't
lot of power in identifying that. Like there's been many times, like journaling is one of my greatest like self-awareness and self-care tools. Just keeping a diary, like however you want to do it. You know, I know a lot of people for some reason get intimidated by putting their thoughts on paper, but
oh yeah.
I really do encourage people to do that because it helps you to exactly see when you're standing in your own way. And you know, to kind of retreat a little bit earlier, what you're saying, like we're all like the main actor on the stage of life for our own individual stories. You know, we experience this reality first person perspective. So I'm the main player in my inner dialogue, you're the main player in your inner dialogue. And I think sometimes with that, like you said, we can kind of get so absorbed in that, and we think that there's going to be like this hero or somebody who comes in to like save us. Something is going to come into our lives that'll change, you know, the circumstance or whatever it is, and then you won't feel that sadness, you won't feel that hurt, you won't continue to have those issues. But in my experience, it doesn't work like that. Like, you know, it sounds terrible to say, but like no one's coming to save you.
No, it's
No,
true.
nobody is. Like it's when people close their eyes at the end of their day and they're going to sleep, they're not thinking about like poor you know, oh, that Shayleen girl, she seems really sad, she's going through a hard time. No, they're thinking about the million things on their own plate that stress them out, that they have to do, their responsibilities. So I try to kind of share that with people sometimes. And like you said, it's a fine line between almost sounding, you know, a little bit of like an ass, or that it's just so easy, because it's not. I identify that it's not easy, but there it comes back to that sense of like taking some responsibility for yourself, your life, and what it is that you want to create. Like, where are you headed? You know, you said about thinking a little bit more about like the future. You know, where am I going to be in 20 years? I think that's a really important component to self-care, to healing, to helping yourself, is like setting those goals and carving out, you know, a little bit of direction to where you want to go. What does your perfect life look like? What does your highest version of yourself look like? How do they feel? What do they think about? What do they eat? Who do they spend time with? You know?
It's true though, yeah. Um, and like even back to the media, because there's two things I want to touch on. One, you
Yes.
just made me totally think of it, this whole hero coming to save us. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly bombarded in the media with this. The first issue is that every great film, the whole thing's a crisis. You're sitting through an hour and a half of crisis. Um, and it gives you this perception that like your life should be in crisis all the time, and that there's always going to be some horrible catastrophic event happening. Because when you watch movies back to back to back, like if I binged watch, you know, superhero movies for the day, my whole day would be crisis and people coming to save people.
Yes.
That would be it. So then it warps your mindset into believing, one, my life needs to be in crisis all the time because it wouldn't be this exciting if it wasn't, and two, someone's coming to save me. And they're both false.
Mm-hmm.
um the flip side to that, there's the other side of the media where everybody's happy all the time. um you know, like for example, I my mom watches the news every day. It drives me nuts. I try to just like leave the room when it's on because they always say that one thing, and then I'm like angry for an hour after because of what they said for 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
um but they make it sound like the world's this horrible place, and they say it with a smile. They're so happy all the time. You know, the world's going to shit. Everybody's going to die, and I'm so happy to be sitting here telling you about it. And
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna crack jokes with each other while we tell you about how horrible your fucking life is.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the same with like commercials. Like we're constantly bombarded with advertisements, and everybody's happy all the time. It doesn't matter. Like, what the hell was it, that genital herpes commercial that used to be on with the guy and his wife cycling, and they're all like big smiles the whole time talking about genital herpes, and then at the end of the commercial, they both look at the camera smiling, and he goes, "I have genital herpes," and she smiles and looks at the camera and goes, "And I don't." And they're just like so happy to go on with their day that like because of this medication that he's taking, she didn't get his herpes, and I'm like, why are we happy about this? I,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
to some degree, I mean, yeah, if I had a partner who had herpes and I didn't get it from them, yes, I'd be happy. I don't think I'd spend my whole day smiling around biking in the forest over it, but yeah, it's just very manipulative.
Yes.
And it,
Part of that illusion.
yeah, it gets you to buy stuff. If everybody in a commercial was depressed, and sad, and they were trying to advertise, like let's say Coca-Cola said, hey, we're going to take all these happy people out of our commercials and everyone's just going to look miserable all the time, they're not going to sell as much. When new products come out, people aren't going to want to buy them, because if people look happy to have these new products, then it stimulates your mind into believing that you'll be happy if you have that product,
Hmm.
um,
Just
which
to add to
isn't true,
that,
but
exactly. And I think that it's something that, it sounds almost silly to say, but it was something that was really detrimental to like my self-awareness and just understanding, you know, how the world works is like nobody, and maybe it's different today, but it's like nobody ever told me when I was a kid that the things you see on TV aren't real. So, and like I said, it seems pretty obvious when you're like, what you see on TV isn't real, or like what everything you see on the internet isn't real, but some people don't know that.
well,
There is no
I had the same
distinguishing.
thing as a kid though too. Like I really I, I I didn't understand it. I didn't take the time to understand it
Yeah.
because I was a kid. I was just seeing, these moving pictures in a box,
Yeah.
and I actually think it's probably worse now though, because like when we were kids, our main source of visual stimulation was the television. Like we didn't have internet access like we do now, and like I
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine, for as bad as the habits I developed with television as like a 7, 8 year old kid, had I had the internet, I can't even imagine what I would be like now if I had been, given that much option.
Hmm.
Um,
Influence, exposure, right? To
well, and
those.
that's it. Like, and I think it's probably worse now because people aren't really, are you telling your kids, the ads you see on the internet, videos you watch on YouTube, especially YouTube, because there's YouTubers making videos like we're doing right now.
That's us. We are the YouTubers.
Hypocrites. Um, but I they think because it's these real people in their real homes that what they're doing is real, and like to some
Yeah.
degree it's like reality TV where they're showing you what they want you to see, and
Yes.
maybe it's not totally scripted, but they probably went into the video with some kind of idea of what they were going to do. um and everybody's trying to do something to get views, and yeah, and like unfortunately a lot of young minds are being exposed to that, and their belief systems are being shaped based on garbage that people are putting on the internet so they can make a living.
Yes. And I think that just comes back to the point of why it's so important that people do establish that connection with themselves to regularly turn within, because exactly, if everything in front of you is so conflicting and there's so much knowledge, there's so much information at our fingertips today, that how do you decide what is true?
Yeah.
And again, what's true for me is going to be different than what's true for you. So aligning with that, making the space to explore that, having beliefs and ideas that you formulate around, the experiences that you've had, the information that you do expose yourself to, like, yeah, identifying and aligning with that own truth of yours, right?
Well, and a lot of it I think comes from, like, there's a huge lack of discipline now, especially with cell phones and the internet being so accessible, and like people need, like, I would go as far to say like they need to discipline themselves, they need to discipline their children to say, hey, I feel like it's a lot harder now with things being so accessible, and especially kids technology addictions, which
Hmm.
is a real thing, whether
Yeah.
people want to admit it or not. But if your kid's throwing a tantrum because you told them to put their tablet away to eat dinner,
Yeah.
they have a problem.
Yeah.
And people don't want to see it that way. But you need to discipline yourself to put your devices away for a period of time every day, and you need to discipline your children to being like, hey, look, this is the time of day. It was like when we were kids, and there was that hour of TV after school, and then you had to do your homework or whatever. Like it was always usually something to some
Hmm.
degree where it was like you need this amount of time away from it.
Yeah.
And people need to do that, like regardless of how accessible it is. Like I'm convinced if I have kids, like there's not going to be any devices, and they're going to be homeschooled, and everything's going to be done with like pencil and paper, because like I can't even fathom putting my kids in the school system and them having access to a tablet all the time,
Yeah.
because teachers are too lazy to print off sheets of paper to give them.
Yeah.
And then they argue it's for the environment. I'm like, well, it's you not corrupting my kid's mind with this garbage. Like I
Hmm.
struggle with it.
No, I'm
I
with you.
really do.
Have you watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
Yes,
Yeah, I just
yeah,
watched that recently, and it was almost like spooky to watch. There's like parts of it where I just was like, it's almost overwhelming to think of the way that exactly technology is so accessible and how it influences our lives. And like most of us have our device like within arm's reach all the time. The first thing we look at, the last thing we look at, the day start. I know. Mine's on the table, like exactly. So yeah, it definitely contributes, I think, to this increase in, whether it is exactly mental health or even just feeling a little bit disconnected from the world around us.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too is that whole kind of coming back to that manipulation, because if you didn't stay disconnected from the world around you, you would actually, if you take the time to be mindful of what's going on around you and you see what's going on, you're going to realize that it's not as bad as it seems. Like if you just go sit outside right now, there's not someone, well, there's probably not someone dying, I can't say for sure, but there's not all these horrible things happening. There's probably not a robbery and someone dying in the street, and you know COVID zombies running around or whatever it's going to be this week. Like it's really, as far as I can tell from my window right now, it's pretty peaceful out there.
Yeah.
People are going about their day. It's kind of gloomy. The birds are flying around, but there's not much actually happening
Yes.
in terms of like it's almost that, like, what are you disconnecting yourself from? And it's really just this like manipulated fear that you're afraid of what's out in the world, and you're afraid of yourself, and we're manipulated into this disconnect using fear. And then, like, if you realize there's nothing to be afraid of, either within yourself or literally outside of yourself, um all that control would be gone. So it'd be, if everyone woke up every day and just ignored their phone and went outside and just enjoyed the nothingness that's going on in the world, and they felt content, like, goodbye Facebook.
Hmm.
So the other thing with like the social dilemma, I watched a video that was kind of like playing devil's advocate to the whole thing, not in the sense of like the not in the sense of like the points they were bringing up, like, yes, they're clearly manipulating and controlling us using this shit, um but it's just like the hypocrisy that comes from these people who are like, I made my millions of dollars off of this. I realized how wrong it was, and now I'm going to sit here and be like, this is bad.
Yes.
Um, so, and it really makes you question, though, too, like, because they talk about the greed that everybody has, and that's why they're not changing it. But, like, at what point were they still making an income off of this, and they decided it was wrong, and they kept making an income off of it, too, right? So
Yeah.
it's, I get they're bringing awareness to the whole thing, but at the same time, there's a lot of hypocrisy in that, because you chose to do this. Like, you can't tell me that, like, yeah, we just had good intentions at the time, and we didn't at all see the flip side of this, that we were going to rope all these people in and be able to manipulate them with it. I find it hard to believe because some of them do sit on there and be like, yeah, it was just a really innocent thing that we were working on. Facebook was paying us, millions of dollars, and it was just going to be this innocent, fun, happy thing that like everybody was just going to be cool with, and there were going to be no negative consequences. Um, I think I'm just ranting about it.
No,
I
it's
don't
all
even
good. I'm
know
just
where
taking
I'm
it
going.
in a different direction.
I'm like, I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. I was talking about
It's
being
part of the bigger
side,
problem
but
is really
it
is what
is.
it is, right? And it is tied into a lot of that capitalism, and it is helping people to wake up to those ideas and to break free from the influence of ideas structured around profit and gain at sometimes what is the expense of human life or human, well-being. So yeah.
Yeah. And I
Heavy
mean,
topic.
it is though, and it is. It's so hard to be like just making people understand that they need to take responsibility for themselves instead of, because a lot of people do blame it on, well, I have this and it's accessible, so I should, use it. And it's
Hmm.
not, it's, well, they realize you think that way and that's why they make it so accessible. So it's you saying, I'm going to take X amount of time every day to disconnect myself from the disconnecting advice device, whatever, the disconnection device. Um, and just saying, it's not good for me, because it really comes down to, and this is why they get away with it being so quote unquote manipulative, because it comes down to that personal responsibility of,
Hmm.
we're giving you this choice, we're putting the choice right in your hands, but we're giving it to you. Um, and like even a kind of a radical example, but if, let's say the Queen of England showed up right now, she walked in my door and she handed me a gun and she said, you can kill anybody that you want for the next hour and you'll have absolutely no consequences to it. I'm the queen, whatever I say goes. Um, would I take that gun and start killing people? I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, or just
But
even to like look at that within yourself and ask those big questions. Exactly. Like, am I doing it because somebody says, yeah, okay, it's acceptable, or am I doing it because it's something within me that I value? Or
yeah, but it's that argument of accessibility. So just because it's made accessible to me doesn't mean that I need to do it.
yeah. And
I
I
might,
think like you said, taking that personal responsibility, right? Because that's another big influential thing is like we can sometimes get so caught up in, well, our friends and our family, they act that way, or, they do these things or don't do these things. So like I think part of that conditioning is like, well, we want the social acceptance, right? We want to be included. So we kind of start to repress those parts of ourselves that maybe go against the status quo, go against the grain, right?
yeah. And that's kind of what I like about, I guess, the place that I work, is because I do get a lot of people who come in and they have that where, everybody close to them in their life is not on board with what they're doing or what they're wanting to do. Um, and then it gives them that safe space to come in and be like, hey, you know, I feel like I can, you know, show my true colors and be myself in this space for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. And it's like, I just try to emphasize to people that like it at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what they think. Like, we put on masks for everybody that we're around. So when you're around those people, just put your mask on and, uh, let them think what they want to think. It doesn't matter. And then keep doing what you're doing and you'll attract like attracts like. So eventually you'll attract like-minded people into your life. It might be a little bit lonely for a while, but if you keep doing it, keep working towards it, eventually those people are going to come into your life.
Yes.
And
And
it's,
maintaining that, like that value of your authentic, unique self, because there always will be people on our path that, are offended by what we do or what we say, or are triggered, or think it's just like, yeah, crazy, it's left field, it's
yeah,
ridiculous, whatever, however they want to label it. But there will always be people in our life that don't agree with what we're doing. So, are you going to constantly change yourself to make those people happy, or are you going to maintain that sense of self and just continue, like you said, trust? That element of trust is very big, to trust that those people who are supposed to hear your message will hear it and it will resonate with them, or that the people that are meant to be on your path will find you will connect with them.
Yeah. And like, I mean, even like the job that I have, there are people who, just as an example, they're not okay with men working in that industry.
Yeah.
Um, I, I don't so much. Luckily for me, there was one of the guys who works there. He's been working there for about 3 years, and he went through that when he first started there, where like women would literally come in and get angry about the fact that he worked there and tell him that like he didn't belong there, that it was
Wow.
this is a this is a woman's industry, like men don't belong here, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, what does that matter? So it's really like
But that's great. That to me, I'm like, that fires me up, Steve, because I'm like, healing is for everyone. Spirituality is for everybody, all walks of life, no matter what you identify as. So, but I feel like you also see that when you are in that spirituality, business or lifestyle, that, and I've heard you talk about this in some of your other podcast episodes, is like people that, are self-proclaimed experts or gurus. And exactly, they think that it's okay to dictate like who healing is for or who spiritual awakening is for, when really I think the foundation of it and this idea of like love and connectedness is that it's for everybody. You just have to come to it at your own time in your own way.
yeah. And there's, oh my god, what is this guy's name? Is it Drunvalo Melchizedek?
Oh, I'm not
he,
familiar.
he's wrote the those books that's like The Secret of the Flower of Life.
Okay.
They're like real thick.
Yep.
um but he has a shorter book called Living in the Heart. um and he talks in that about how, because he does do I don't know, he kind of, I don't how much is true, like I haven't experienced what he does, but he
Mm.
kind of guides people into like connecting deeper with themselves and kind of awakening their intuition in that. And he's, some of the stuff he says in the book is kind of out there, and I'm on the fence about whether or not it really happened. But um, one of the things he does talk about is that everybody experiences it differently. So, like for some people, it's very visual. For some people, it's auditory. For some people, it's empathic. So it's feeling. Um, and the one example he had is that he did one of these, and um, like everybody kind of saw like this glorious, trippy light show thing, but the one guy didn't see anything. But he kept saying, he said, but that music that was playing. And they're like, well, there was no music playing.
Yeah.
Well, because he doesn't have the visual stimulation, so he connects with energy through auditory clairaudience. So it's like everybody experiences it differently, and that's why, like a lot of this with the spiritual stuff is difficult, because it's easy to manipulate people into believing that things need to be a certain way, but then there's that manipulation side where they'll tell you that if you stick with them long enough, you keep coming back to them, eventually you'll get there. You'll experience what they claim everybody who sees them experiences, and it's not necessarily true. And that's, again, staying true to yourself and getting to know yourself, because until you have the experience and you actually feel it, you don't really know what you connect with until
Mm-hmm.
you've connected with it. That's
Yeah.
why it's hard, because for people who have serious disconnect, um, helping them find what they connect with is difficult, because you don't know until you know.
Yeah. And
And
all the more reason, like for me, like the importance behind empowering people to help themselves, because it is so individual to each of our experiences, each of our beliefs, each of our, our passions, what it is that we want to create in this world during our lifetime.
yeah, okay. So to sum it up, the steps you would take to helping yourself.
Yes, helping yourself, help yourself. To sum it up, I'm going to read it right here because I got it.
Yeah.
So, the first step to making change is identifying the areas that are creating discomfort or no longer serving you. You can do this through intuition, by identifying your emotions, by observing your behavior, and connecting with your mind and your heart by spending time asking yourself, those questions that you want answers or insight into. And then deciding what you're going to do. The action step is really important. It's great. You can have all the information, you can have all the answers in the world, but until you decide to do something about it, nothing is going to change. So taking action, as I mentioned, I think journaling is a great key to help support people. And it's kind of just like an extra place for observation of some of the experiences that we have, identifying limiting beliefs and behaviors, setting goals and intentions for yourself, because it's very important. How do you know what your idea of happiness or success is um, if you've never looked at that or defined those terms for yourself? How do you know that you've achieved what you want to achieve until you know what it's going to look like and feel like? Another thing I think is really important for people is to like daydream, or just to think about the things that they believe in, to find that inner truth and hold on to it, and then start to make the changes so that the actions you go through in your day-to-day reflect that. So aligning with what it is that you want to create, what you want to feel, how you want to show up for yourself and others. Then that element of trust that you are where you're supposed to be, trust that, even though we don't understand, that it is all part of the bigger plan. Trust in yourself, your ability um, to make those decisions, trust in your judgment. And then, the last couple things I have here is finding that balance between doing and being, because I think that's a big one that comes up a lot in the work that I do with my Reiki clients. Is we are always in this state of do, that we very often don't take the time to just allow ourselves to be, to explore our creativity, to play, to connect. Yeah, and keep it light, I think, as well. That's something I always have to remind myself, is like, it's not supposed to be so serious and so
Yeah.
hard all the time. It's not always about accomplishments and achievements. Like, there's supposed to be that balance where we do have fun, where we do get to laugh and play, and just have a little bit more enjoyment in life, I think is really important. And the last thing I would share to people, one of the biggest ways to help yourself is to give yourself your own time, energy, and attention.
Yeah. Well, very well said.
Thanks, Steve.
I agree. I I agree with it. I'm glad you were much more prepared for this than I was. Like, you've got a notebook with everything written on it, and
Well,
I'm
it was
just like, wing it.
preemptive.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah. No.
preemptive passage, so it just happened to align with, us choosing this topic after the fact. So thank you as well for just being so um, like on point. Like I said, I really appreciate your energy and your time and what you're doing to just hold space for conversations of this nature.
Yeah. And I mean, like for me, because you had asked a couple days ago, I had a whole list on my phone of things I had typed
Yeah.
out when we had that conversation. You're like, what are we going to talk about? And I like pulled the list up, and then this was just the first thing that jumped out at me, and I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. Um, yeah, there wasn't really much thought beyond that, but it
Feeling. It was
worked
the
out. Yeah,
feeling.
and that
Mm-hmm.
was it. That was just what felt right to talk about today, so I went with it. But yeah, and thank you for giving me your time as well. And we'll definitely do some more of these. And for sure, anything comes up that you want to talk about, just let me know.
Of
Write some
course.
notes.
Yes.
You seem to be good with this, like getting it out on paper and then like being prepared. Where um, I don't know. I think I rely a little too much on my intuition sometimes, where I'm like, I can just wing everything in life because my intuition's going to guide me. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, no, maybe you should be a little more prepared.
So funny. It's that
So
balance, because that's something that I try to strive for more, is just like, yeah, let's wing it. Let's just see whatever comes up. So maybe next time we'll switch. You'll have the notes and I'll be like, I'm just showing up today.
we could
uh,
try it, yeah. And even I guess just one last thing too, because it was on my mind when you said it earlier. I don't know why I didn't say it earlier, but when you're talking about like people, doing too much and not just letting themselves be and like finding that balance, and then there's that flip side where like sometimes you do need to do, and you're trying to just let things be, and you're like, well, it'll all work out, and then there's like, well, you're not putting in any effort. Um, so yeah, I would say like today we kind of represent those two sides of it, where like you're all prepared with notes, and I'm just like, I can wing it.
yeah.
We're good.
But identifying, right? Because like that's, it's balance, but then it's no longer in balance when you start to identify like exactly like, hey, I'm always just winging it and I'm not very prepared and I just kind of show up, and then all these things keep going wrong and I'm always feeling stressed out about it, or like I'm not like, oh, I didn't like how I showed up, or I didn't like my response to this.
Mhm.
And then you can decide to change. But if it's working for you, it's working. So
Yeah,
when it stops working, you know.
and I think it's like some of it's just not being cocky and just being aware that maybe you're not doing enough at times. And like I think that's kind of where I'm like saving myself, is that I'm aware that maybe I'm not, but it just leaves me open to, if I need to do more,
Mhm.
I'm aware that is a possibility. So anyways.
Well, I think you're doing great, Steve. So
Well, thank you.
you're so welcome.
All right. Well, it was great talking to you. And yeah, we'll do this again soon.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Looking forward to,
Shayleen.
yes, seeing the recording. So we'll talk soon. Okay.
Sounds good. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.